the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oak Haven, a sense of tranquility usually reigned supreme. Neighbors knew each other, children played freely, and the rhythmic hum of suburban life was a comforting constant. Among its longtime residents was Linda, a woman known for her warm smile and a seemingly endless supply of homegrown tomatoes she often shared. She was, to all appearances, a pillar of the community, a friendly face everyone recognized and trusted. Then, things began to change. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, a discordant note began to vibrate through the peaceful harmony of Oak Haven. Linda, the friendly neighbor, started to exhibit a shift in her demeanor. Her usual cheerful greetings became strained, her interactions with others less open. A subtle unease settled over the block, whispered about in hushed tones during morning walks and over garden fences. It was a shift that hinted at something deeper, something unsettling brewing beneath the surface of their quiet lives. The first real crack in Oak Haven's placid facade arrived abruptly and disturbingly. One crisp morning, the usual quiet was shattered by the wail of police sirens echoing down Elmwood Drive. Officers converged on Linda's meticulously kept home, their presence an immediate spectacle that drew curious glances from every window. Linda herself stood on her porch, visibly distressed, gesturing emphatically towards her property. The scene was one of bewildering destruction. Windows on her charming colonial house were shattered, jagged shards of glass glistening on the manicured lawn. Crude, vibrant graffiti, stark against the cream-colored walls, defaced the carefully painted exterior. And her beloved garden, once a riot of colorful blooms, was a chaotic mess of trampled plants and overturned pots. It was an act of senseless vandalism, a shocking violation in a neighborhood that prided itself on its safety and serenity. Linda's voice, usually soft and melodious, was now tight with indignation and what seemed like genuine fear. She pointed a trembling finger not at some unknown assailant, but directly at her next-door neighbors, the Johnsons. The Johnsons, a hard-working couple with 2 young children, lived in the house adjacent to Linda's. Their relationship, while not overtly hostile, had certainly seen its share of minor squabbles in the past. A stray ball landing in Linda's prize-winning petunias, a dispute over the height of a shared hedge. Nothing, however, that hinted at this level of animosity. Linda spoke with conviction, recounting recent disagreements, framing them as a motive for this destructive act. The police listened, their expressions grim, taking notes as the community watched, a growing sense of disbelief and apprehension settling over them. The very idea that such malice could exist between neighbors, especially in Oak Haven, was almost unthinkable. Yet, the evidence of destruction was undeniable, and Linda's accusation hung heavy in the morning air, beginning to cast a long shadow over the Johnsons. The Johnsons, taken entirely by surprise, vehemently denied any involvement. David Johnson, a man known for his calm temperament, stood before the officers, his face a mixture of confusion and outrage. His wife, Sarah, tried to comfort their visibly frightened children, while simultaneously attempting to explain their whereabouts on the night of the vandalism. They offered alibis, provided phone records, anything to clear their names, but the accusation, once voiced by Linda, seemed to cling to them. The police, maintaining their professional detachment, assured both parties they would investigate thoroughly. They collected samples of the spray paint, took photographs, and interviewed other neighbors, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The incident sent ripples through Oak Haven. Residents who had once casually chatted with the Johnsons now exchanged wary glances. Some openly discussed the evidence, though it was mostly circumstantial. Others, remembering Linda's quiet generosity over the years, rallied to her side, offering sympathy and support. The neighborhood, once a tapestry of interconnected lives, began to fray, threads pulling apart under the strain of suspicion. The Johnsons found themselves isolated, their familiar routines now punctuated by the uncomfortable stares of their neighbors, the silence of once friendly greetings. Just as the initial shock of the vandalism began to recede, replaced by a tense quiet, the situation escalated. A few days after the initial police report, Linda once again summoned the authorities. This time, she presented them with a series of anonymous, threatening letters. These were not crude scrawls like the graffiti, but carefully composed messages, typewritten and delivered directly to her mailbox. The language was menacing, chillingly direct, warning her to leave Oakhaven, to abandon her home and her life there. What made these letters particularly disturbing was their content. They contained details only someone intimately familiar with Linda's life would know. A specific flower she cherished in her garden, a small, distinctive statue on her porch, even a habit she had of drinking tea on her swing at dusk. The precision of these details lent a terrifying authenticity to the threats, suggesting the sender was not a random stranger, but someone close, someone who had observed her, someone who knew her routines and her personal space. The implication was clear. The perpetrator was not just targeting her property, but her very presence in the neighborhood. And once again, the uncomfortable whispers in Oakhaven turned back to the Johnsons. The arrival of the threatening letters cast a long, chilling shadow over Oakhaven. It wasn't just the physical damage to Linda's property anymore. It was the psychological terror, the invasion of privacy implied by the personal details within those typed messages. The initial shock gave way to a palpable sense of unease, then to outright fear. If Linda was being targeted so directly, who else might be next? The unspoken question hung in the air at every neighborhood gathering, every chance encounter on the street. The Johnsons, already reeling from the accusation of vandalism, found themselves under an even harsher spotlight. The contents of the letters, with their intimate knowledge of Linda's routines, seemed to point damningly towards someone living nearby, and who lived closer than David and Sarah Johnson. Their denials, once firm, now seemed to falter against the weight of growing suspicion. Their once friendly neighbors avoided eye contact, their voices hushed when the Johnsons passed. Children were quietly told to play inside, away from the perceived threat that now seemed to emanate from the Johnson household. The community of Oakhaven, once so united, began to splinter. On one side stood those who unequivocally believed Linda. They remembered her long years of quiet civility, her acts of kindness, her gentle nature. To them, she was a genuine victim, relentlessly persecuted by a malicious individual. They organized small acts of support, dropping off meals, offering to help clean up the remaining debris from the vandalism. They saw the Johnsons' strained expressions and evasive behaviors as signs of guilt, their fervent denials as proof of desperation. On the other side were the skeptics. These were the residents who, despite the mounting evidence, couldn't quite reconcile the image of the Johnsons, a quiet, unremarkable couple, with the idea of them being vengeful vandals and sinister letter writers. They remembered past minor disputes between the two households, but nothing that suggested a capacity for such dark, calculated malice. They whispered about Linda's increasingly dramatic public displays of distress, her sudden willingness to point fingers so decisively. Could it be an elaborate misunderstanding, or something else entirely? But their doubts were quickly drowned out by the tide of fear and the fervent belief in Linda's story. To voice skepticism too loudly was to risk being ostracized, to be seen as condoning the attacks, or worse, as being complicit. The police, while maintaining a neutral stance publicly, found themselves caught in the middle of a deeply divided community. They followed leads, interviewed more residents, and meticulously documented every piece of evidence Linda provided. They knew the emotional stakes were high. An unsolved crime of this nature, especially one that fractured a community, could have lasting repercussions. The pressure mounted to identify the perpetrator, to restore peace to Oakhaven. The tension became almost unbearable. People started to lock their doors earlier, double-checking their windows before bed. Neighborhood watch meetings, once sparsely attended, now overflowed with anxious residents demanding action. The Johnsons, meanwhile, lived under a cloud of unspoken accusations. Their children faced whispered taunts at school. Their once thriving local business saw a marked decline in customers. The fabric of their lives, once ordinary and comfortable, was being systematically shredded by the pervasive suspicion. David and Sarah found themselves constantly defending their innocence, not just to the police, but to anyone who would listen. They even hired their own legal counsel, anticipating further trouble, a move that only solidified the suspicions of some neighbors, who saw it as a desperate measure from guilty parties. Linda, on the other hand, appeared to thrive on the attention, drawing sympathy and support from those who believed her. She became the neighborhood's rallying point, the embodiment of their collective fear. Her garden, partially cleared of debris, became a quiet shrine of victimhood. The police, observing the increasingly fraught situation, understood that a resolution was paramount. They needed concrete proof, not just accusations and speculation. The only way to truly settle the matter, to expose the truth and quell the escalating division within Oakhaven, was through objective, irrefutable evidence. It was time for a more direct approach, a way to catch the perpetrator in the act, whoever they might be. The police, recognizing the escalating tension and the deep rift tearing through Oakhaven, knew they needed a definitive answer. Accusations, no matter how fervent, were not enough. They needed irrefutable proof, something that would cut through the fear and suspicion that had paralyzed the neighborhood. The decision was made to install surveillance cameras around Linda's property. These were discreet, strategically placed devices designed to capture any activity, day or night, without alerting a potential perpetrator. The goal was simple: catch whoever was responsible for the vandalism and the threatening letters in the act. The installation of the cameras was carried out with utmost discretion. Officers worked under the cover of darkness, ensuring that the presence of the surveillance equipment remained unknown to the residents, including Linda and the Johnsons. It was a waiting game, a silent vigil aimed at uncovering the truth. Days turned into a week, then two. The tension in Oakhaven remained thick, but the immediate crisis seemed to have abated, at least outwardly. Everyone waited, hoping the cameras would finally provide the closure they so desperately needed. What the surveillance footage eventually revealed, however, was far more shocking and utterly bewildering than anyone could have anticipated. When the officers reviewed the recordings, they didn't find a shadowy figure creeping from the Johnsons' yard, nor did they see a stranger slipping through the quiet streets. Instead, the cameras captured Linda herself. The initial footage showed her late one evening, moving stealthily through her own garden. It was a bizarre, almost surreal sight. She was seen not as a victim, but as a perpetrator, methodically uprooting her own plants and deliberately overturning pots, meticulously recreating the very scene of garden destruction she had initially reported to the police. The act was slow, deliberate, a chilling pantomime of distress. As the officers continued to watch, the revelations became even more disturbing. Other recordings showed Linda, cloaked in the dim light of dawn, approaching her own mailbox. With a swift, practiced motion, she would deposit letters, the very anonymous, threatening letters she had tearfully presented to the police just days before. The footage was undeniably clear. The person orchestrating the terror in Oakhaven, the individual behind the vandalism claims and the sinister threats, was Linda herself. The realization hit the investigative team with a profound sense of disbelief. The woman who had presented herself as the ultimate victim, who had garnered so much sympathy and support, who had pointed the finger so decisively at her innocent neighbors, was in fact the architect of her own torment. Every tear, every distraught account, every accusation had been a meticulously crafted performance. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable, captured in stark, silent detail by the cameras. The Johnsons, who had endured weeks of ostracism and suspicion, were finally on the verge of having their names cleared. But the implications for the entire community were immense. The woman they had trusted, the friendly face of Oakhaven, had engaged in a calculated campaign of deceit, turning neighbor against neighbor and shattering the peace of their once tranquil suburban haven. The truth was about to unravel, and it promised to be a painful revelation for everyone involved. A small strip of land between their two properties, a few feet of earth that barely registered on the average person's radar, had become an all-consuming obsession for Linda. She had felt wronged, cheated, and unjustly treated, even after legal mediation had settled the matter. Over time, this minor disagreement had festered, transforming into a deep-seated resentment that warped her perception of the Johnsons. What began as petty grievance had escalated into a desire for revenge, a need to make them suffer, to strip them of their peace and reputation, just as she felt they had taken something from her. Her plan was to drive them out of the neighborhood, to destroy their lives in Oakhaven, and to do so while simultaneously garnering sympathy for herself. She saw herself as a victim of their past transgression, and this elaborate scheme was her twisted way of regaining control and exacting her own brand of justice. Her confession revealed a chilling level of premeditation and an alarming capacity for deceit. The quiet, friendly neighbor was, in reality, a master manipulator, willing to sacrifice the peace of an entire community for a personal grudge. Linda's confession, undeniable and devastating, swiftly led to her arrest. The police, having spent weeks navigating her intricate web of deceit and the ensuing community uproar, now had a clear path to justice. She was formally charged with multiple serious offenses, filing false police reports, a deliberate and egregious misuse of law enforcement resources, vandalism for the calculated destruction of her own property aimed at implicating the innocent, and harassment, specifically targeting the Johnsons with sinister letters and a prolonged campaign of intimidation. The weight of these charges was considerable, reflecting the premeditation and malice behind her actions. The news of Linda's arrest and the shocking truth of her deception tore through Oakhaven like a storm. The initial reactions were a tempest of shock, profound betrayal, and a deep sense of disillusionment. For those who had instinctively rallied around her, offering unwavering belief in her victimhood, the revelation was a bitter, sickening pill to swallow. They grappled with the agonizing realization that their genuine empathy had been cruelly exploited, their fundamental trust deeply and irrevocably abused. The comforting image of the friendly, generous neighbor who shared her homegrown tomatoes was not merely tarnished. It was utterly shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of a cunning, vengeful, and profoundly manipulative individual. Conversations in Oakhaven shifted from hushed suspicion to angry disbelief as neighbors wrestled with the enormity of the deception. For the Johnsons, the news brought a monumental wave of relief, a release from the suffocating weight of suspicion that had crushed them for weeks. Their names were finally, unequivocally cleared, the heavy, suffocating cloud of public accusation lifted from their lives. The wary whispers that had followed them everywhere ceased, replaced by a torrent of heartfelt apologies and expressions of profound regret from neighbors who had doubted them. Yet, the emotional toll of weeks of ostracism, public scrutiny, and the silent condemnation was significant. They had endured the systematic destruction of their good reputation, the visible strain on their children, and the painful fracturing of once friendly relationships. Rebuilding their standing in the community, and more importantly, truly healing from the profound emotional trauma of the ordeal would demand immense time, patience, and resilience. The legal process for Linda began, and it was a decidedly public one. The case rapidly became a local sensation, a captivating and horrifying saga dissected in community forums, local newspapers, and hushed conversations over garden fences. It became a stark object lesson in the devastating power of an unchecked personal vendetta, illustrating with chilling clarity how deep-seated grievances, left to fester and warp the mind, could escalate into a complex, calculated campaign of criminal action, leaving a trail of destruction that extended far beyond the immediate targets, impacting an entire community. Linda faced the full, unyielding weight of the law, a direct consequence of her deliberate choice to betray the fundamental trust of her community and orchestrate a complex, insidious web of lies. Her legal team could offer little defense against the undeniable surveillance footage and her own confession, and the legal proceedings moved inexorably towards a resolution. The Johnsons, having suffered so much, were called upon to provide victim statements, recounting the fear, the isolation, and the damage to their lives and livelihoods. The entire ordeal in Oakhaven ultimately served as a stark, unforgettable, and profoundly cautionary tale. It laid bare the inherent dangers of deceit and the deeply corrosive force of personal grievances allowed to fester into malice and criminal intent. The community, bruised and shaken, learned a difficult but absolutely crucial lesson about the perilous ease with which judgments could be made and the vital importance of not jumping to conclusions without concrete evidence. The alarming swiftness with which suspicions had fallen on the Johnsons, meticulously fueled by Linda's convincing and theatrical performance, revealed just how easily a cohesive community could be manipulated, how quickly fear and rumor could erode reason, and how fragile the bonds of trust truly were. The case also shone a harsh light on the delicate balance of trust that existed within a neighborhood and how effortlessly it could be shattered by a single, malicious individual. Oakhaven was forced to confront the unsettling reality that appearances could be profoundly deceiving, and that even the most seemingly innocuous or familiar individuals might harbor hidden agendas and destructive intentions. The long, arduous process of rebuilding trust and fostering a renewed sense of community began slowly, cautiously, almost tentatively. Neighbors began to engage in more open, honest communication, to question assumptions, and to actively seek factual verification before allowing suspicion or hearsay to take root and spread. There was a collective resolve to prevent such a dark chapter from ever repeating itself. In time, the Johnsons, demonstrating remarkable resilience and fortitude, began to fully regain their place in the community. Their unwavering innocence, finally proven beyond doubt, became a testament to their character and integrity. They were able to mend fences, rebuild their business, and restore a sense of normalcy for their children, though the scars of the experience would undoubtedly remain. Oakhaven itself, though forever changed by the profound and unsettling experience, ultimately emerged with a heightened collective awareness of the complexities of human nature, the fragility of trust, and the vital, enduring importance of truth, accountability, and the careful, deliberate preservation of communal harmony. The quiet streets of Oakhaven eventually regained a semblance of their former peace, but it was a peace now tempered by a newfound wisdom, a hard-won understanding of the shadows that could lurk even in the most sunlit of places. The story of Linda served as a constant, quiet reminder that true peace was not merely the absence of conflict, but the active cultivation of integrity, honesty, and a collective commitment to justice.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.